Graduation day was finally here. I'd been waiting for this moment since I was a kid, counting down the years like it was the finish line. The auditorium was packed with families and dreams. I kept scanning the crowd, looking for the 2 seats I'd marked with their names days ago. I'd saved them thinking they'll still show up. Around me, everyone was hugging, laughing, and tossing their caps like the last few years had been nothing but fun. I smiled for them, even as my thumb hovered over my phone, battery barely hanging on, hoping against hope for a message. When the music began, I still pictured them slipping through the back doors, late from traffic, wind in their hair, smiling the way they used to when the world felt whole. They didn't. The metal chairs stood with that stiff, empty posture chairs have when they are waiting for anyone else. The names on the tape looked like a prank I played on myself. I sat down, flanked by strangers' mothers leaning over with flowers and camcorders, and I realized I didn't feel surprise. It slid into me like something I'd been bracing for anyway. Not a blow, more a confirmation I was already breathing around. I kept my eyes on the stage and let the rest spool out. Years flattened and lay on top of each other, like when you stack bed sheets wrong and they crumple into one thick corner you can't smooth. When I was 12, they told me they were saving for my future. They had that tone couples get when they've decided to be responsible together, bright and performative, like they wanted witnesses. They took me to the bank, and the woman behind the desk said words like compound and index and handed me a lollipop I was too old for. We stood in the parking lot afterward with sun flashing off windshields, and my dad curled his knuckles on my shoulder and said, "You're going to have choices." He said it like a promise was a brick he could lay once and forever. Throughout middle school, the fund was a character in our home. The fund needs attention. The fund is growing. Don't worry about the field trip fee. The fund's for bigger things. I learned to speak about my future like it had a gravity well of its own. When I was 15, a sales guy at a pool company shook my hand in our backyard. His watch was heavy and reflective. He called me boss and asked me to stand where I wanted the deep end. The grass had the bald patches summer gives to families who never water properly. My mom held swatches of tile in her palm like puzzle pieces. My dad made jokes about cannonballs. I asked, without drama, "Where is the money coming from?" He squeezed my shoulder. Same knuckles, same casual pressure. "We're shifting some things around." He looked at the salesman and laughed about interest rates like he'd invented them. The time they signed, I was doing algebra. I sat at the kitchen table while they clicked DocuSign buttons on their phones. The table was already measured for the remodel, blue tape marking where an island would go, imaginary marble hovering in the air. My mom told me the new kitchen would be great for resale value. My dad said smart investments multiply. Their words clunked on the floor that night, out of place and weighty. I didn't confront them then. I asked around the edges, "How much is left for college? Are you planning to replenish it? Do you want me to pick up more shifts at the store?" Mom waved me off like my questions were gnats. "We're not going into debt for this," she said. "We're reorganizing." Dad added, "There's always community college." It was a normal sentence loaded with a verdict he pretended wasn't there. He followed it with, "We need to think about your brother too," which was an admission he dressed as fairness. My brother, 2 years younger, was a tide that washed over every decision. He played baseball and broke gadgets and managed to be both a mess and inevitable. He had a knack for slipping consequences like a fish through a net. He'd always be the one with a ride, the one with the last slice, the one who could sleep in. When I did well, it was expected. When he did average, there was a parade. I know how this sounds. It sounds petty. It sounds like I am making a ledger of small injuries. I built myself out of small injuries, so I'm not going to apologize for counting them. I took my SATs with a stomach that didn't know what to do with food anymore. I picked up an extra closing shift at the bookstore and learned how to staple gun a new layer of flyers over the old ones in a clean line. I babysat for a neighbor whose kid liked to bite his own shirts. I filed scholarship applications in a blur of essays that all had different word counts and the same desperate core. I wrote about resilience until the word tasted like chalk. I paid application fees by waiting tables at a chain restaurant that served nachos the size of hubcaps. I sealed recommendation letters and slid them into a folder labeled with my name, like a person could gather up pieces of herself and make a case. The night I got the acceptance from my dream school, I didn't tell them. I forwarded the email to a burner account I made in 10th grade that I used for signing up for free trials. I read the acceptance again in that half-legal space, and I cried in my car in the driveway where the motion floodlight always clicked on and made me a spectacle for the neighbor walking his dog. I cried because the letter assumed there was a net for me. I cried because I was the net. I kept the secret for weeks. I sent in the deposit using 3 prepaid Visa cards and a prize check from an essay contest about civil rights that came with an envelope printed to look like a mailer from Publishers Clearinghouse. I felt like I was committing a small crime. I emailed a counselor to ask how to defer for a semester in case I needed to work more. I asked if there were payment plans that didn't break a person in half. When I finally told my parents, I did it over spaghetti. It was a Tuesday, and the table was now the renewed model with smooth edges and cold stone. The kitchen remodel had been completed by men who never made eye contact with me and a foreman who flirted with my mom while my dad loudly agreed we were getting clean lines. The pool was filled and blue. The excavated dirt had stained our fence a permanent rust. I said, I got in, and my mom smiled like I'd said I was pregnant. She snapped a napkin open like a flag. My dad said, let's be realistic. He didn't look up from his phone. They never asked to see the acceptance. They asked about costs. They asked about my brother's schedule and how my move-in date would inconvenience their trip to my aunt's lake house. They said the words responsibly and adult like they were weapons. My mom mentioned the community college 3 times, made it sound like I was refusing a generous offer. When I brought up the fund, she made a face. The pool will add value, she said again. The night I found out my brother's fund was intact and larger than mine ever was, errors? It was because my dad left a financial statement on the printer. The paper feeder spit it out after my laundry sheet. This polite little betrayal sliding into my hands. My name had 3 digits and a comma. My brother's name had more. There were notes in the margins about bonds maturing for him. I thought, there it is. The truth I've been orbiting. I put the paper back in the tray. Not perfectly skewed like he'd left it, but near enough I wouldn't get caught right away. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep felt like trusting the floor. I kept working. I learned the craft of keeping myself alive. I stacked classes back to back on 2 days and worked the rest. I took notes on the bus and ate apples until the skin sliced the roof of my mouth. I kept a spreadsheet color-coded with bills, tuition payments, textbook swaps, and which friends would lend me their PDF of the expensive econ text if I bought them coffee. I found a professor who taught like he remembered what students sounded like before they learned to flatter. He handed me a brochure for a grant I'd never heard of and said, try. He didn't make it a sermon. When I didn't get the grant, he slid me a sticky note with a different opportunity. He was the opposite of my family in that he did not tell me who I was. He asked me who I wanted to be and believed any answer. Thanksgiving, I went home because I still thought balancing 2 realities was possible if I just had better posture. The kitchen gleamed like an advertisement. The pool had been covered, but the cover alone cost as much as my rent. The island had a bowl of fruit artfully arranged. The fruit was fake, slick, and heavy when I picked up a pear and realized it had a seam. My brother's voice carried from the living room. He was telling my aunt how nice it was to have everything handled, how the bursar's office had just posted his balance as 0, how he'd be able to focus on the experience. He used words he'd stolen from brochures. He called tuition handled, like he'd personally wrestled it down. I walked into the living room with my plate. My aunt asked about school. She always asked in a way that made my answers sound like gossip. My mother watched me like I might embarrass her. My dad cleared his throat before every response like he wanted to be sure the air was sympathetic. I didn't plan what came next. I didn't intend a scene. I opened my mouth and told the truth. I said, I paid my own tuition this semester. I said, I work 2 jobs and I study 6 feet from a drunk guy on a bus because we can't afford a car. I said, I found the statements. I didn't modulate. I didn't decorate. I rolled the stone from the mouth of the cave and let the smell out. My mother used the tone she uses when she speaks to telemarketers. Calm, lethal. She said, it's our money. She said, don't be dramatic. She said, your brother's path is different. My father said, we did what made sense. He said, we don't owe you a breakdown of every decision. He said, we gave you a roof. My aunt cut turkey with precise sawing motions like she was avoiding scraping the plate. Someone laughed in the kitchen, unrelated to the moment, and it sliced the room into inside and outside. I said, you chose him? I said, I want you to say it out loud. The words tasted like coin. My brother said, don't drag me, and tried to make it a joke. He has always made everything a joke when he is ashamed. He said, it's not my fault I'm the favorite, and he wanted it to be a way to warm the room. He wanted me to roll my eyes and leave him unburned. I put my plate on the island and walked out. I took my backpack from the hallway and left the fake pear on the counter where I'd set it down. I didn't slam the door because some part of me still wanted to be the steady person in every room. In the car, I called my professor. I meant to leave a voicemail saying I was going to drop 2 classes and rework my schedule because I was exhausted. When he answered, I didn't even say hello. I said, I think I'm finished. It came out in a flat voice, like reading a line from a manual. He didn't ask for details. He said, come to my office Monday. He said, I'll have tea. He said, you're not finished, but if you need to run in place for a minute, that's allowed. That Monday, he handed me a list of crisis resources and told me getting through school isn't an endurance test you win by letting it kill you. He acknowledged I could take less and still be a real student. He did not preach about grit. He told me the names of 2 scholarships I hadn't found. He wrote an email to a colleague whose lab needed an intern and CC'd me without making a show of it. I sat in the chair and didn't cry because I didn't want to cry in his office, not because I was trying to be brave. He said, none of this fixes your family. He didn't try to fix my family. I added a 3rd job anyway. I stocked shelves overnight at a grocery store, which sounds bleak, but there was a rhythm to it that made me feel competent. The boxes were heavy and honest. I measured time in pallet jacks and breaks. My hands developed a new kind of strength, different from hanging on. On Thursdays, I fell asleep on the bus and missed my stop twice. The driver learned my face and tapped my shoulder before the turn I always missed. I found a coffee shop near campus where they didn't mind if I took up a small table for hours. The barista stopped charging me for extra almond milk. Those are the people who made my life possible, the ones who made small choices that let me keep breathing. The internship came through in the muddy way things sometimes do. Half right place, half relentless follow-up. The lab hired me for 10 hours a week, which turned into 15 because someone went on maternity leave and I never let anything fall. I learned to read data like a story. I made my own lunch and ate it in the break room, aware of the way graduate students talked about their advisors like parents they could choose. I got asked to stay after graduation if I wanted to. There was a paycheck attached. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. By the time the commencement email arrived with the seating chart and the list of banned items, no balloons, no noisemakers, I'd stopped arranging my face for my parents. Still, I sent the date, the time, the venue, the parking instructions, a map with a small red circle around the recommended lot. I wrote, I'll reserve you seats. I didn't know whether I was offering them grace or building a paper trail. It didn't matter. I printed the little name tags for the chairs because part of me still wanted a clean photo. I put on the rented gown over a dress I bought secondhand. The mirror in my room showed a person who looked older than the people in the catalog photos holding rolled up diplomas. It also showed a person who had learned how to keep promises to herself in the absence of anyone else doing it. My roommates made a sign with my name in bubble letters. My mentor mentor texted me a line of fist bump emojis. I tucked a granola bar into my sleeve like a contraband weapon. At the ceremony, as I sat and listened, I could feel my jaw unclenching in increments. I watched the president of the college nod through stories of donors and legacies. The graduates in my row whispered to each other and straightened their caps. A mother behind me cried quietly in a way that sounded like relief more than joy. When the dean read my name, the applause I heard wasn't a roar. It was concentrated, pointed. It was my chosen people rising in a clean line. Friends who learned to love me in the mess. My mentor, a barista in a denim apron who had a break that coincided with my name. 2 coworkers from the lab, one of whom brought a handmade sign that said, "In spite of it all." I walked to the stage like I was walking to a bus stop, ordinary and necessary. The photographer's flash went off. The registrar handed me a folder that contained a piece of paper that was emphatically not a diploma yet. I walked back to my chair. The empty 2 chairs sat in my line of sight like a reminder and nothing more. After, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. We didn't know the date. She had been sent 4 emails. I looked at the words and didn't feel an electric snap of pain. It landed like lint. My friends pulled me into a huddle and put a paper crown on my head. My mentor hugged me without saying something stupid like, "I'm proud of you like a parent would be." He said, "You did exactly what you said you would do." Months slid by. I started the job. It was full-time. I made a budget that included new socks, takeout twice a month, savings labeled emergency reel, and a line item called replace things that are embarrassing. Finally, the wobbly chair, the blender with a crack, the jeans that always needed a hair tie to close. I downloaded a therapy app, and after 3 false starts with therapists who asked the wrong questions, I found one who got straight to the point. What would you have needed them to say for it to feel like care? My answer changed every week. Sometimes I wanted an apology. Sometimes I wanted them to vanish. Sometimes I wanted a time machine and a different house. I got a phone call from my mother in late summer. She asked how I was, then didn't wait for an answer. She said, "We had some unexpected expenses." She used a voice like she was explaining a weather event. She said the market had dipped and they'd had to replace the pool pump and my dad's company had downsized and wasn't it crazy? And could I help? Not them. Help your brother. He was having a hard time. His refund check was delayed. Could I float him a loan? Just short term. You know how these things are. She asked like she wanted me to be touched. She asked like I'd been waiting for my chance to be useful. I didn't clench. I didn't rehearse. I said no. I said it without dressing it up. I didn't offer a reason. I didn't write an essay. I didn't set a boundary by telling a story. I just said no. The line was quiet for a second in a way that felt like the house after a thunderstorm. Air heavy with what just happened. No immediate damage, but something changed. She tried again, softening, hardening, changing angles. I repeated the word until it felt like a brick I could hold in my palm. She texted me afterward that I was cruel. She wrote, "Family helps family." I didn't argue. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and went for a walk to the bodega where the cat sleeps on the lottery tickets. I bought a soda I don't even like and gave the cashier exact change. I went home and hung a picture on the wall all by myself, a cheap frame, a photo of my friends crammed into my kitchen, one of them on the counter because I didn't own enough chairs yet. I hammered the nail too hard and left a little crater in the drywall. I liked it. It made the room honest. 6 months out, I signed a lease on an apartment I could afford without sharing my bedroom. The living room had a crooked window that let in the kind of light that makes dust look like living things. My bed was no longer a mattress on a box spring. I bought a real bed frame off Facebook Marketplace and negotiated the price in a thread that made me feel like a person who could ask for what she wanted. The neighbor played saxophone at night and sometimes butchered the same phrase for an hour, and I found myself rooting for him to nail it. I planted a basil plant in a chipped mug and named it Basil because that felt like a right-sized joke. My brother texted me a photo of a community college parking pass. He added, "Guess I'm local now." I typed and deleted a dozen responses. I settled on, "Parking at least is easy." He sent a thumb up emoji. It wasn't truce and it wasn't war. It was 2 people who lived in the same weather and brought different umbrella sizes. My parents still post pictures. They still stand beside the pool with their teeth like white stones. They still talk about how hard they worked for what they have and how kids these days don't want to grind. I don't correct them. I don't read the comments. I mute them for a month when I need to breathe without their voices sneaking in like radio in another room. I go to therapy on Wednesdays. The therapist asks about the dreams where the house has moved under my feet and I'm walking room to room without finding a door. She asks about the way my jaw gets tight in grocery stores, how I cannot stand aisles of abundance because it makes me feel like someone else's child. She says, "What were you taught to do with your anger?" I tell her, "Tuck it in." She says, "Is that working?" I tell her, "I can lift heavy things with that muscle, but it's always breaking me somewhere else." On a quiet Sunday, I sat at my desk in the light that falls off the crooked window and opened a blank document. I thought about the story I usually tell when someone asks how I did it. I have a canned version full of grit and bootstrap and how failure sharpened me. It's neat and it makes people nod. It cuts the ugly parts into shapes that people can handle. I decided to write the version that isn't neat. I wrote about the time my mother told me, without looking up, that I was exhausting. She said it like she was reading the weather. I wrote about the time my father told me to be strategic about who I told my good news to, as if I could ration my own joy to make everyone comfortable. I wrote about the kindness of strangers and the way the bus driver knew my bad stop. I wrote about the taste of cheap granola bars at midnight and the way the lab's fluorescent lights made my brain feel like it was underwater. I wrote about the holiday table where everyone pretended not to hear me unmask something rotten. I wrote about my brother's laughter, brittle and defensive, and how sometimes I still want to shove him back to make room for myself, and sometimes I want to put a blanket over his feet because he'll never admit he's cold. I wrote about the graduation seats, the empty ones, the paper name tags curling at the corners, mirrors because tape never holds on metal for long in cold rooms. I wrote about how, when my name was said out loud, the people who loved me made a sound that made my shoulder blades lower by an inch. I wrote about my mother's text, the one that claimed ignorance like a strategy, and how my response was a hallway I chose not to walk. I wrote about saying no on the phone without shaking. I wrote about the part of me that still wants an apology, and the part of me that has stopped seeking it like a ticket to entry. I don't believe in need endings. You cut off contact, someone gets sick, you loosen your boundary, you tighten it again, you hire an accountant, you make a will, you learn the name of a cat who isn't yours, you consider what it means to be your own parent. Some days I am filled with a bright fury. Some days I am a lake. Some days I look at the pool photos and think about resale value, and wonder if my mother's kitchen still smells like lemon oil she learned about on YouTube. I can want contradictory things and not be dishonest. I can miss the version of them they were for me when I was 12, and still believe that the real version never looked up from their phones when it counted. Last week, my mentor emailed me a link to a fellowship I didn't think I could win. It required a personal statement and 3 references and a list of publications I don't have yet. I stared at the application portal and felt that old tightness in my chest that lives like a tenant I didn't invite. I almost closed the tab. Instead, I opened my resume and added the job I always leave off, the overnight stocking gig, because nothing has taught me more about persistence than slicing open cardboard with care not to cut what's inside. I wrote the personal statement like I write this, without trimming. I didn't bleed for anyone in it. I didn't perform my pain. I exported it to PDF and felt something uncoil. If you're reading this, I'm not here for advice. I'm here because some stories deserve sunlight, and silence doesn't grow anything. I used to pack all of this away in tidy boxes labeled context and understanding, and they did the best they could. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It doesn't matter now because I learned something bigger. The life I wanted was never theirs to give me. They spent the money, but I found a richer currency. My own work, my own resilience, my own joy. I built a life from the ground up, and every inch of it is mine. It's morning light spilling over a chipped mug, basil leaves brushing the glass, the hum of the fridge in my first real kitchen. It's the saxophone next door finally hitting the note he's been practicing for weeks. It's the quiet pride of paying my rent, hanging my own pictures, cooking dinner for friends who have become family. They can keep their pool and countertops. I'll keep the life I earned, the people I chose, and the freedom to decide my own path. Because in the end, they didn't take my future. They handed me the chance to prove I could create it myself. And I did. And I will. Again and again.